My name is Hannah Preston. I'm 28, and I planned the lavish party where my own father publicly destroyed me. In front of 100 of Napa's elite, he raised a glass to my perfect sister before turning his gaze to me. "Every family has its burdens," he said, his voice like silk and venom, "the unfortunate operational expenses." The silence that followed was a physical blow, a guillotine. They thought shearing their black sheep would be easy. They didn't realize they'd just handed me the blade, and I was about to cut down their entire rotten family tree. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever gone above and beyond for family, because trust me, you'll want to hear what happened. The Harvest Gala at Preston Vineyards was a spectacle, a glittering lie dressed up as a Thanksgiving dinner. The air was heavy with the scent of oak-aged wine and Chanel No. 5, the chandeliers casting golden light over tables draped in crisp white linen. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, my clipboard a shield, my black dress a shadow. For weeks, I'd orchestrated every detail: caterers, lighting, the seating chart that kept feuding investors apart. Nobody noticed. Nobody ever did. My father, Richard Preston, took the stage, his silver hair catching the light like a crown. His voice, smooth as the Cabernet he sold, filled the room. "To legacy," he said, raising a glass. "To Preston Vineyards, a family built on vision." His eyes slid to my sister Brooke, radiant in her emerald gown, her smile a polished weapon. To my daughter Brooke, our guiding star. The room erupted in applause. I gripped my clipboard tighter, my knuckles white. Then his gaze found me, standing by the dessert table, and his smile turned sharp. "Of course," he said, his tone light but venomous. "Every family has its burdens, the necessary but unfortunate operational expenses, those who lack public-facing ambition." A gasp rippled through the crowd. My mother, Eleanor, elegant in her sapphire silk, stared at her plate. Brooke's lips curled into a tight, knowing smirk. The silence that followed was a living thing, coiling around me, squeezing the air from my lungs. My face burned, my chest hollowed out. I set my clipboard on the table, the clatter deafening in my ears, and walked out. Eyes followed me, whispers trailing like smoke. I didn't look back. In my beat-up Honda, the cold November air bit at my skin through the cracked window. I drove into the night, the vineyard's lights fading in my rearview mirror. My phone stayed silent, no calls, no texts. Not from Mom, not from Brooke, not even from the staff I'd worked beside for years. Their silence wasn't neglect, it was punishment. For daring to feel the sting of my father's words, for making my pain visible. I was the black sheep, and they were shearing me out of the herd. Days bled into weeks. I stayed in my tiny apartment, the walls closing in, the hum of the fridge my only company. I'd check my phone, hoping for a crack in their resolve. A sorry, a comeback, nothing. The gala's humiliation played on a loop in my mind, my father's voice carving deeper each time. I'd spent years keeping their world spinning. Vendor contracts, delivery schedules, every invisible cog, and they'd turned me into a punchline. I wasn't just alone, I was erased. 2 weeks after the gala, a knock jolted me from my haze. I opened the door to Aunt Carol, my mother's bohemian sister, her gray curls wild and her scarf a riot of colors. She carried a thermos of soup, the kind she'd always brought when I was sick as a kid. "Hannah," she said, her voice warm as she pulled me into a hug. "You poor thing. You're the one holding that family together, and they'll never see it." Her words were a lifeline, the first kindness I'd felt in weeks. We sat on my sagging couch, the soup's warmth seeping through the mug in my hands. Carol's eyes softened as she spoke of Mom, of how she'd changed since marrying Dad. "Eleanor's trapped in his world," she said, shaking her head. "But she sees you, Hannah, even if she can't say it." Before she left, Carol pressed something into my palm. A vintage silver locket, its surface tarnished but intricate. "Your mother wanted you to have this," she whispered, her tone conspiratorial. "A family heirloom, for the daughter who truly deserves it." I clutched it, my throat tight. It felt like a promise, a tiny spark in the dark. That night, alone again, I sat under the dim glow of my lamp, polishing the locket with a cloth. Its weight was comforting, solid, but as I turned it over, my thumb caught on a faint seam, barely visible. My heart stuttered. Why would a locket have a seam? Suspicion curled in my gut, sharp and cold. I grabbed a butter knife, my hands trembling, and pried it open. No space for a photo. Just a micro SD card, glinting like a secret. I didn't sleep. I drove to a pawn shop the next morning, cash in hand, and bought a cheap burner laptop. Back in my apartment, I locked the door, drew the blinds, and inserted the card. The screen flickered to life, and my world tilted. Files. Hundreds of them. Invoices, emails, bank records. My family's empire, Preston Vineyards, was a house of cards built on fraud. They'd been bottling cheap Central Valley grapes, slapping reserve labels on them, and selling them at premium prices for over a decade. Shell corporations, offshore accounts, a counterfeit label printer, it was all there, meticulously documented. I scrolled, my breath shallow. Then I saw it. Legal documents for a shell company, Sutton Enterprises, with my signature forged on every page. I was listed as the sole director. My hands shook as the truth sank in. All those years of signing paperwork, handling the boring logistics, they'd been grooming me. I wasn't just the invisible daughter. I was their scapegoat. The realization was a blade, slicing through the fog of my grief. I wasn't broken anymore. I was furious. The fury was a fire, cold and precise, burning away the girl who'd begged for their approval. I sat in the dark, the laptop's glow casting shadows on my face. My family had played me for a fool, but they'd underestimated me. I knew every corner of Preston Vineyards, the vendors' quirks, the delivery schedules, the hidden cracks in their perfect facade. They thought they'd broken me. They were wrong. I needed an ally, someone who'd believe me. Mark Olson's name came to mind, a disgraced financial journalist who'd sniffed too close to Dad's secrets years ago. Dad had crushed him, leaking rumors that tanked his career. I found his blog, a bitter corner of the internet where he still ranted about corporate corruption. Using a VPN and an anonymous email, I reached out, dangling a single piece of evidence, a shipping manifest discrepancy I'd filed myself, buried in the vineyard's records. It was small but verifiable. He bit. We met at a diner 2 towns over, a greasy spoon where nobody would look twice at us. Mark was wiry, his eyes sharp despite the bags beneath them. "Why should I trust you?" he asked, stirring his coffee. I slid a USB drive across the table, my heart pounding. "Check the manifest against public shipping records, then tell me I'm lying." He didn't trust me. Not yet. But he took the drive. Days later, he emailed back. "You've got my attention." We started small, trading encrypted messages. I fed him crumbs, vendor names, dates, nothing that could trace back to me. Each piece built his trust and mine. For the first time, I wasn't alone in this, but the weight of the SD card's secrets pressed heavier each day. My signature was on those documents. If this went wrong, I'd be the one in handcuffs. I started noticing things, cars lingering too long outside my apartment, with my phone buzzing with unknown numbers. Paranoia crept in, a shadow I couldn't shake. One night I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my door. I froze, my pulse hammering, clutching a kitchen knife until dawn. Nobody was there, but the fear lingered. My family wasn't just a business, they were a machine, and I was a cog they'd discarded. Now, they were watching. I kept moving, kept planning. Mark and I mapped out the fraud's web, linking shell companies to offshore banks. Each discovery was a brick in the wall I was building, a wall to shield me and trap them. But the diner meetings, the late-night emails, they were a risk. I dyed my hair brown, started wearing hoodies, blending into the background. The black sheep was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who'd learned to hunt in the dark. The fire in me didn't flicker, it hardened, like steel forged in a furnace. I wasn't the Hannah who'd fled the gala humiliated and small. I was something else now, a shadow moving through their world, using their own tools against them. Preston Vineyards was my battlefield, and I knew every inch of it. The vendors who'd trusted me, the delivery drivers who'd joked with me, the schedules I'd memorized, they were my weapons. I wasn't just surviving, I was hunting. Mark and I worked in secret, our encrypted messages a lifeline. He was cautious, still scarred from my father's takedown, but every piece I fed him, discrepancies in bottling records, coded emails to offshore accounts, tightened the noose. I created an anonymous online identity, Vintage Truth, and leaked small, untraceable tidbits to wine blogs, stirring whispers in the industry. A mislabeled shipment here, a questionable invoice there. Nothing big enough to point back to me, but enough to make Dad sweat. I haunted the vineyard's edges too. Late at night I'd drive past, noting which trucks came and went, which security cameras were blind spots. I'd spent years being invisible, Now it was my strength. One night, I slipped into the warehouse lot, my hoodie pulled low, and photographed a delivery of Central Valley grapes mislabeled as Napa Valley stock. The flash of my camera felt like a gunshot in the dark. I was gone before anyone noticed, my heart pounding, but steady. Mark pushed for more, but I held back the SD card's biggest secrets. My signature on those shell company documents was a guillotine over my neck. If I misstepped, I'd be the one in prison, not them. So I played it careful, feeding him just enough to keep him hooked. He started digging into Richard Preston's past, unearthing old lawsuits, hushed-up scandals. "Your dad's a snake," he said during one of our diner meetups, his voice low, "but snakes leave tracks." I nodded, my jaw tight. I wasn't just after justice, I wanted them to feel what I'd felt, cornered, exposed, powerless. But even as I plotted, doubt gnawed at me. What if I was wrong? What if I brought it all down and they still walked away? At night, alone in my apartment, the locket sat on my nightstand, a reminder of Aunt Carol's kindness, or her game. I didn't trust her, not fully. Her sympathy had felt real, but so had Mom's love once. I pushed the thought down. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. I had Mark, my evidence, and my own sharp edges. That was enough. They knew something was wrong. I could feel it in the air, like the static before a storm. Brooke was the first to strike. Her Instagram posts started popping up, old photos of me, awkward teenage Hannah, tired Hannah at a vineyard event, paired with captions dripping with fake concern. Thinking of my sister, struggling with stability, she wrote under a shot of me asleep on a couch, my face pale, "We're here for you, always." The comments poured in, strangers pitying me, industry insiders whispering. She was painting me as unhinged, unreliable, a perfect scapegoat. Then Dad joined in. I got a call from the cafe where I worked part-time, stocking shelves to pay my rent. "We're letting you go," the manager said, his voice clipped. "Legal issues." I knew Dad's handiwork, his influence ran deep in this town. A week later, a process server showed up at my door with a lawsuit. Misappropriation of petty cash from my vineyard days, they claimed. It was nonsense, but the legal fees drained my savings like blood from a wound. I moved into a rundown motel, the kind with flickering neon signs and stains on the carpet. My world was shrinking, and they were the ones squeezing it. Paranoia became my shadow. A car idling outside the motel made my pulse spike. A stranger staring too long at the gas station sent me hurrying back to my room. One night, I found my door's lock scratched, as if someone had tried to pick it. I didn't sleep, sitting against the wall with a baseball bat I'd bought for $10 at a thrift store. They were trying to break me, just like they'd broken Mark years ago. Their power wasn't just money or charm, it was fear, the kind that made you doubt your own mind. I almost cracked. One morning, staring at my reflection in the motel's cracked mirror, I barely recognized myself. Hollow cheeks, eyes like bruises. I thought of giving up, of begging Dad for forgiveness, letting them swallow me back into their world. But then I remembered the SD card, my forged signature, the years I'd given them. They didn't get to win. I called Mark, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "We need to move faster," I said. He didn't ask questions, he knew what was at stake. We started cross-referencing the SD card's data with public records, building a case that could hold up in court. Every email, every forged document was a brick in our fortress. But the walls were closing in on me too. I stopped going outside unless I had to, my world reduced to the motel room, the laptop, and the hum of fear in my chest. I was fighting, but I was scared. And they knew it. Mark found their weak spot, the crack I'd been waiting for. Buried in a tangle of financial records, he uncovered a secret second mortgage on the family lake house. Mom's pride, the heart of their perfect family myth. The loan was high interest, toxic, taken to cover Dad's gambling debts. It was hidden from the vineyard's books, a ticking bomb. I saw my chance. I pooled the last of my savings, every penny I hadn't spent on legal fees or motel nights. Through a burner email, I contacted a third-party debt collector and bought a small slice of that mortgage debt, enough to make me a legal stakeholder. My hands shook as I signed the paperwork, not with my name, but as vintage truth. Then, with Mark's help, I drafted a notarized letter to the bank, demanding an immediate audit of the loan's origination, citing irregularities. It was a gamble, a shot in the dark, but it was precise. An audit would unravel the fraud, the shell companies, all of it. without tying it back to me. The response was immediate. Mark got word from a contact at the bank. Panic. Dad was calling in favors, trying to stall, but the audit was moving forward. I imagined him in his office, his face red, his voice roaring. For the first time I felt the scales tip. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was the one making them run. But the victory was fragile. The motel's thin walls let in every sound: cars, footsteps, the hum of a world that felt like it was closing in. I kept the locket close, not for comfort but as a reminder. Even Carol, the one person I'd thought was on my side, could be playing a deeper game. I didn't trust anyone, not fully. Mark was an ally, but he had his own agenda, his own score to settle. I was walking a tightrope, and one wrong step would send me crashing. Still, I kept moving. I leaked more crumbs to the blogs, fueling the industry's whispers. A wine critic posted about rumors of fraud at a major Napa vineyard, not naming names but close enough to make Dad flinch. I watched Brooke's Instagram go quiet, her perfect facade cracking. The lake house, their sacred symbol, was my leverage. I'd pulled the pin on their grenade, and now we were all waiting for the explosion. The summons came like a guillotine's blade. A curt email from Dad, demanding my presence at a final family meeting at the vineyard estate. My stomach churned as I read it, but my hands were steady. I'd been waiting for this. The audit letter had hit its mark, and now they were scrambling. I called Daniel, the lawyer Mark had connected me with, a quiet, sharp-eyed man who'd taken my case pro bono after seeing the SD card's evidence. "Bring everything," he said. "It's time." The estate loomed against the dusk, its stone facade glowing under the floodlights. I walked through the oak doors, Daniel at my side, my dossier tucked under my arm like a loaded gun. Inside, Dad sat at the head of the dining table, his face a mask of controlled fury. Mom stood by the window, her hands clasped tight, her eyes anywhere but on me. Brooke lounged in a chair, her smirk brittle but intact. They looked like a tribunal, ready to pass judgment. "Hannah," Dad began, his voice smooth but edged with steel, "this nonsense ends now. Return whatever you think you have and we'll forget this ever happened." His words were a trap, baited with the promise of forgiveness I'd once craved. I didn't flinch. Instead, I opened the dossier and slid it across the table. 10 years of fraud, I said, my voice calm but cold. Central Valley grapes sold as reserve, shell companies, offshore accounts, and my signature, forged on every document that makes me the fall guy. Brooke's smirk faltered. Mom's hands trembled. Dad's face went white, then red. "You ungrateful," he started, but the doors swung open, cutting him off. Aunt Carol strode in, her bohemian scarves replaced by a tailored suit, flanked by 2 corporate attorneys. Her smile was smug, predatory. "Well done, Hannah," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "You've brought it all to light." I froze. Something was wrong. Carol turned to Dad, her eyes gleaming. "I gave her the locket," she said. "I knew she'd find the card, and now, with your empire crumbling, Richard, I'm taking what's mine." She laid out her plan, a hostile takeover of the vineyard, using the scandal to oust Dad and claim control. She'd used me, played me like a pawn, her sympathy just another lie. The betrayal hit like a punch, stealing my breath. Carol, the one person I'd thought saw me, had been no different. She'd fed me to the wolves to get what she wanted. Dad roared, Brooke screamed, Mom sank into a chair, but I stood still, the dossier heavy in my hands. They were tearing each other apart, their perfect facade shattered. And yet, amid the sting of Carol's deception, a dark satisfaction bloomed. They'd built this trap, and now they were caught in it. Daniel touched my arm, grounding me. "We're not done," he whispered. I nodded, my resolve hardening. Carol might have played me, but I wasn't her puppet. I'd come too far to let any of them win. Months passed, each one a slow unraveling of the Preston name. The audit tore through the vineyard's books, exposing the fraud to the world. The press descended, headlines screaming about forged labels and laundered money. Dad and Carol were locked in a vicious legal battle, their attorneys clawing over the vineyard's remains. Brooke vanished, her Instagram dark, rumors swirling that she'd fled to Europe to start over. The lake house, that sacred symbol, was sold at auction, its proceeds swallowed by creditors. I could have joined the fight, staked a claim in their war, but I didn't. Working with Daniel, I forced a liquidation of the family's assets, the vineyard, the lake house, the offshore accounts, to a neutral corporate entity. I took only what I was owed, a calculated sum for years of unpaid labor and the funds tied to my forged signature. It wasn't vengeance. It was justice, clean and final. I left Napa behind, the vineyard's shadow fading in my rearview mirror. With my share, I bought a small house on the Oregon coast, a weathered clapboard cottage perched above the Pacific. The first time I stepped onto the porch, the ocean air was sharp and clean, carrying none of the vineyard's cloying sweetness. Inside, the house was sparse, a creaky floor, a second-hand couch, a single cactus I named June, its spines glinting in the sunlight. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I spent my days walking the beach, the sand cold under my feet, the waves a steady rhythm that drowned out the past. I started working at a local bookstore, shelving novels and chatting with customers who didn't know my name or my story. It was quiet, unremarkable, and I loved it. For the first time, I wasn't invisible because someone else decided it. I was just Hannah, living on my own terms. Some nights, I'd sit on the porch, June on the table beside me, and think about the vineyard. Not with anger, not anymore. The fury that had driven me was gone, replaced by something softer, steadier. I'd broken their cycle, not by claiming their throne but by walking away. I'd built something new, something small but real, on ground they couldn't touch. I didn't know what came next. Maybe I'd write about it one day, tell the story of the black sheep who burned it all down. Or maybe I'd just keep living, one day at a time, letting the ocean teach me how to breathe again. And my story isn't about revenge, it's about realizing your worth is not a gift someone else can give or take away. For years I sought validation from people who saw me as a tool. The true victory wasn't watching their empire fall, but in finding the strength to walk away and build my own small, quiet world. So, if you feel lost in someone else's shadow, remember this. The most powerful move isn't taking their throne, but building your own house by the sea, where you can finally breathe. Your peace is worth more than their power.